Okay, so now what we're going to do for today, this is the last subtopics of the chapter 15, okay, selections and evolution. So we come to the last part of the topics where we're going to look at these evolutions and also speciations. Okay, so what are the learning outcomes that we need to actually learn here? We're going to state, okay, first we state the general theory of the evolutions that organisms have changed over time. Okay, so it means from time to time there must be some changes in terms of the features so that they will well adapt to the change of the environmental factor. Okay, so then followed by this, we're going to look at what is the role of the pre-zygotic and post-zygotic isolating mechanism in the evolutions of the new species. So how new species actually evolve, okay, and why this pre-zygotic and post-zygotic isolation is so important. And we're going to look at it if in case there is a development of the new species, then we have two ways of the separations. One is the geographical separations, another one is ecological and behavioral separations. Okay, so we're going to look at this, how these allopatric and sympatric speciations do take place, how of these allopatric and sympatrics. So we started with the theory of evolution first. Okay, what we're going to learn in this topic. Okay, so basically when we talk about theory of evolution, so we have to know that evolution is a change. Change of what? Change of the heritable characteristics of the biological populations over successive generation. Okay, so it means that from time to time you can see that the feature change, like humans, how the evolutions of the human start with different species and continue to adapt and evolve in this case. So must have some heritable characteristic. So some characteristic that cannot be heritable, that is not called evolution. Okay, so why we thought that it must be evolution? Why cannot be spontaneous generation, means from one and then out of sudden then humans actually arise, or out of sudden the rat actually come out? That is impossible because we do have some evidences to show that, okay, evolutions actually take place. For example, all new species that arise must arise from the existing species. It cannot be arise out of nothing, but it must arise from the existing species. And the result of this, because there is a continuity, because we pass on allele from one generation to the next generation, that's why we do share a common ancestry. So the common ancestry here actually refer, if you look at the phylogenetics classifications one by one, you link them all together. At the end, we're going to point to what we call the LUCA here. Basically, it's the last universal common ancestor. So what's the LUCA? LUCA, until now, we do not know who is the LUCA, but basically LUCA actually is a term that we use to show that the first living organism in the world. All of us actually linked to them. We're going to learn about this evolution, species, and also classifications in the next two topics when we talk about the biodiversity, how we do the classifications and conservations. Okay, so what are the evidence here? So out of all organisms, we share the common chemistry. What's common chemistry? Basically our protein. You look at all proteins that we have, it must be having this 20 amino acids. Okay, then in terms of physiological pathway, we do share the same pathway, glycolysis. We talk about these anaerobic respirations, right? In terms of cell structure, we can see that all of us have the cell membrane. All of us, we can see that we have the ribosome, for example. So some structures, that must be some what we call the evolution take place until everything so similar. And in this case, all living organism, our genetic material is DNA, and we have the universal genetic code. So what's the universal genetic code? Basically, that's our ATCG. All living organisms use ATCG. Why we don't have an additional one? Why we don't have the something? Okay, something that's special. For example, okay, human use ATCG, animal, maybe tiger use XYZ. No, why they don't? Because there is a form called evolution take place. One species evolved from another or pre-existing species. Clear? So the distinguishable differences are due to the modification. So every successive generation, there is a certain modifications. Okay, certain modification. So we have two person actually come out with, two person actually come out with their own idea of the theory, okay, regarding to a theory of evolutions, we have the Lamarck and Charles Darwin. Okay, so what we're going to look at is Lamarck theory. So Lamarck's theory actually is called acquired characteristic. Now it's acquired. If you look at the diagrams here, so Lamarck actually believed that initially giraffe have short neck. All giraffe, they have short neck. But because of the food, okay, the leaf actually grow on the tall tree, so it means that in order to survive, then they actually grew their neck, become longer and longer and longer until they can achieve, okay, the height of the tree. So it means that Lamarck believed that giraffe had a long neck because the neck grew longer during a lifetime so that it can stretch to reach the leaf in the high up tree. That is a form of evolution, because if they don't do this, they won't be able to get sufficient leaf to eat. They won't be able to actually grow. So in this case, you can see that over a long period of time, the necks become longer and longer. So each generation of giraffe have longer necks than the previous generation. Okay, so this is the Lamarck's theory. Okay, Lamarck's theory. So it's acquired. So means that it's not naturally occur, but acquired characteristics. Okay, but Darwin has his own theory. Okay, so theory of natural selection here. So what Darwin actually believed? Darwin believed that variation is there. So it means that the giraffe can have the long neck, short neck. Can you see that? But due to the natural selection, due to the natural selection, because the tree grow taller, only those have the long neck can survive. Okay, those with the long neck can survive. And then what they do, because the gene or the allele code for the long neck, because of the giraffe can survive, then the long neck giraffe pass on the this long neck allele to the next generation. So those short necks not enough, cannot get enough food, so directional selection take place. Directional selection, we say that. Why? Favor one end. So what is the one end? Where is the one end? The tall necked giraffe will have the selective advantage, pass on the allele. So over many generations, you can see that the population of the giraffe have the long neck. So this is a form of directional selection and cause the evolutions to take place. Can you see that? Now the whole population can adapt to the change already. So this is what Darwin said. Okay, so Darwin said what? Okay, features that make organisms more likely to survive or reproduce are therefore more likely to appeal to each generation. Means that they will be able to survive and pass on the allele to the next generation. So in terms of the giraffe, Darwin theory will state that longer necked giraffe were more likely to survive compared to the short necked giraffe. Can you see that? Because they can get sufficient leaf, they can grow, they have enough nutrients, and they will be able to pass to reproduce and pass on the allele to the next generation. Okay, so why long-necked giraffe can survive? Because they are more or better fit for their environment. So in this case, involve the theory of survival of the fittest. Can you see that? So they struggle, and only those fit to the environment, they will be able to continue to survive, pass on the allele to the next generation, because the change in the allele frequency. Okay, so what are the Darwin observations and come out with this idea? Okay, why Darwin say that, oh, long-necked giraffe, short-necked giraffe were two variations, and only the variation that have the selective advantage we're going to reproduce based on the observation here. So what are the observations by Charles Darwin here? Charles Darwin has observed that and say, organisms produce more offspring than they need to replace the parents. If to replace the parent, two enough already. Correct? Two enough already. Why they produce more? So produce more, in this case, you can see that in the first part of the topics, we always say that that is, okay, exponential growth first. Correct? Exponential growth. But after for a while, you can see that the populations fluctuate around the ideal level. Can I see that? So observation 2 by Charles Darwin say that natural population tends to remain stable in size. The population size remains stable over a long period. So it means that organisms produce more offspring, but not all of them can survive. Not all of them can survive. That's why the population remains stable. If all of them they can survive, basically you can get the exponential curve continuously. But now it's going to oscillate around, right? Oscillate around the ideal level. Okay, so this ideal level, why? Because there is a competition for the survival. Why they have competition for survival? So it depends on which variation. Okay, so that's why I struggle for the existence. Why? Maybe resources, food resources not enough. For example, competitions for the mate. So those competitions, then these overpopulated, those offspring, they have to struggle, continue to survive. Okay, and observation 3, there is a variations among the individual of the given species. So it means that why same species, you have a different color code, same species but different shape. Okay, different, for example, phenotypes. Why we do have this? Okay, why we do have this? Okay, basically means that the variation will make sure that only those with the best variants or best characteristics will be able to adapt and continue to pass on the allele to the next generation and cause the evolution to take place. So the best adapted variants will be selected by the natural conditions operating at that particular time. So for example, the change in the environmental factor, particularly, for example, predator here. Okay, so in other words, natural selection will occur no matter how. So the best variants have the selective advantage. So it means that survival of the fittest occur. Basically means that those they can adapt will continue to survive. Those variants continue to survive and then pass on the allele to the next generations. Okay. So among these two theory, Lamarck theory actually has been disapproved. Okay, disproof. Why disproof in this case? Because lack of the evidence to support. But Darwin's theory have more support in this case. Why? Because we do know that whenever change takes place, if you want to pass on to the next generation, it must be able to be inherited. So for example, in this case, let's say dark skin battle. So you go under the sun and make sure that your skin become dark. But if your genetic makeup here, the genetic makeup actually show you are the albinism, no choice, because in this case, you only will pass on the allele to show that you have fair skin, right, to next generations rather than the dark skin, no matter how dark you are due to the exposure to the, the exposure to the sun. Okay, so it doesn't matter because the one that actually can pass on to the offspring is through allele, nothing. We only can pass on the allele to the next generation. We won't be able, okay, to pass on what we call it, the characteristics to the next generation, just like out of nowhere. Okay, the things, right? So the environment factor affected by environments is the allele frequency. So allele frequency is determined by the survival of the organism that show favorable characteristic and thus adapted to that particular environment. So you have to know that in this case, allele cannot be affected by the environment unless mutation. That one is nothing to do with the environment because it's caused the mutation. So in this case, those allele that confer the best characteristic or the fittest characteristics will be able to be passed on to the next generations. So that's why Darwin's theory have been supported by a lot of evidence. Now you also can see that the natural selection managed to select and choose which variants or which variety will be able to survive better, pass on the allele to the next generation. So over a long period of time, if that is the environmental factor remain constant, then you will see that more organisms actually show the favorable characteristics, because it determines by the survival of an organism. Okay, so with this, we have done for the evolutions. So next, we're going to look at this concept of species. So let me stop the recording first.